Broadcasting live from the Murrow College of Communications. It's the Evan Pretzer Show. And now, your host, Evan Pretzer.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, I'm here with the video journalist Robert King. Robert has spent some time in various war zones through the years, and I reached out to him after seeing the documentary about his work entitled Shooting Robert King. It's an excellent film, and if you haven't seen it, you should. Now, Robert, one question I want to ask you is that you mentioned in the movie Shooting Robert King that you went to art school. Now, how and why did you decide to take the skills you learned there and become a war correspondent? Was it something that you wanted to do even when you started out at school, or is it something that you realized you wanted to do halfway through your education?
It was something that I realized I wanted to do halfway through my education. Absolutely. You know, I started out as working for the high school yearbook, newspaper, teaching photography classes to students and faculty in high school, but was deprived any, schooling in the arts from the schools I attended. We weren't allowed to take art. And then I got, so I have this desire or this passion at the time to become a photographer. And the only real schools that were offering photography as a form, as in the purest form, would be art school. So journalism school didn't really cross my radar at that time because I didn't know that there was much of a distinction at the time in high school. It was all pretty creative process.
Wow.
Obviously, I knew that people, working for the yearbook, working for the newspaper, I understood some concepts of news, but it was still a creative process.
Wow. Now, it's not every day that a parent hears from their kid, hey, mom and dad, I want to go overseas to dangerous places, and the odds that I could get killed are fairly high. When you started out, did your friends and family think you were completely insane?
I don't know what they thought. I think they were very encouraging. They knew that this is something I wanted to do. I don't know. We didn't really discuss the dangers of such, and until later on, till I was already 3 years into the profession. And so it's had its high points and low points. And as a father, as a husband, and a parent, those questions come up more often than, say, when I was first starting.
Wow. Now, how many times do you think, in a ballpark estimate, you've almost died while on the job?
Oh, well, it's all relative, and, it's just, I've been quite lucky. I've never spent time on a gurney due to combat-related injuries. So I've been quite lucky. I've had some numerous close calls, but I don't know. It's been doing it for over 20 years, so there's been a few.
Is there one
kidnappings to snipers, to shrapnel, to to bombs, to everything? But it's all everybody. I don't know if I've been. It depends on how you define that death-defying moment that you're asking about. So it could be, a car honked, and if it didn't honk, it would have hit me when I crossed the street. Or, the car hit me and I went 50 feet up in the air and landed in a swimming pool across the street. So they're each one's different variations, you could say. So I've been very lucky. I really don't think about that. I definitely don't try to count it because, there's always the X factor, the unanswered. And so, your mind can play games and situations can appear much more dangerous than they were at the moment, and vice versa.
Well said. Well said. Now, one of the earliest places you went to in your career was Bosnia. One thing I noticed in the movie Shooting Robert King was you had a scene there where some orphans were feeding you. I've got to ask you, what is the most heartening thing that you've seen in a conflict zone? The one thing that, in the midst of all the grim stuff going on around you, just would give the average person just a happy feeling, so to speak?
Well, a part of that, eating with the orphans, I was doing a story on the orphans of Sarajevo. And, if you're being offered something and refuse it, obviously it won't go over well. But by no means was I eating every day at the orphanage as a way of survival. And I hope it didn't come across in the film that way. I think one of the most endearing things that I've seen recently has been in Syria, and where it was this young nurse's assistant, a young child who had his childhood taken from him by the revolution, and he had to grow up fast. He was out of school. Schools had shut down, so he's behind in his studies, now almost 3 years behind, and so it's hard to get those 3 years back. But this child volunteered his time at the local field hospital clinics and began to learn a trade as a nurse assistant. And so I think that's inspiring. And then there was another one recently at the Zatari camp in Jordan where I met this man named Assad, literally. He was a refugee from Dara. His previous job was he sold chickens. So he fled with his family to the camp. And while in the camp, he noticed that the refugees and his neighbors, being refugees, were not happy with the water that was being the UNHCR. So he started a water purification center inside the camp and also established one of the first water delivery services in the camp. So he would bring bottled water to various dwellings within the camp. And it's that entrepreneur spirit that a capitalistic spirit that wasn't beaten out of him by losing everything. He was able to find therapy in business, and I found that to be very inspiring.
Wow. And that is one thing I've noticed about anywhere you go overseas. I spent some time in Africa, that people just really work so much harder abroad than anyone does in America. Now, you mentioned your time in Syria. You've done some work for the media organization Vice while there. During the times that you've been in Syria, has it just been working on behalf of Vice, or have you gone there freelance just on your own?
I've been going freelance on my own starting in February, and it wasn't until September of last year that I started working with Vice.
What's it like to work with them?
I find that they really have been pleasantly. I've enjoyed working with them. They have a vast audience. And they allow for in-depth reporting. They're not beholden to their advertisers, and it's as a multimedia student, I'm able to utilize other parts of my education, such as video and film production, which is really nice to make that transition in this industry, and where they allow the platform. So on more traditional media organizations, you go and shoot, you go and build the story, you go and give them the story, and then their correspondent in the office will do the VO. Where with Vice, if you're putting in the time and the effort to build a story and to report a story, they demand that the story maker, retains all editorial control, such as doing the voiceover and the reporting. So I find it, I really like the platform that's offered. It does require a lot more time, as in hours put in per day, but it's I'm not complaining about having to work. So I've really been thrilled by the opportunity to work with them.
Nice.
It's been pretty good.
Nice. Now, one thing I noticed when I was watching the documentary is during your time in Bosnia, another war correspondent there, and I hope I'm pronouncing the man's last name right, Jeff Chagrin, I believe, said you didn't have the...
Chagrin, yeah.
Chagrin said you didn't have the aura of a war photographer.
Right.
Is he more respectful of you as a colleague now, or is he still somewhat dismissive of your work?
Oh, probably dismissive. I haven't spoke to him since the 90s, mid-90s. So who knows? I mean, I know he's still in the industry, but it's not a very kind industry.
Yeah, very, very competitive.
It is.
I want to jump around here.
In a real negative way.
Yeah. I want to jump around here to one of the next conflicts that you spent some time around, and that's Chechnya. My opinion, probably one of the worst conflicts of the modern era. Just all the atrocities and horrible things that came out of that war. Anyone who looks at it, it's just mortifying to see. Now, when you were there and you saw a lot of the stuff that was going on, did you ever feel tempted to get involved as more than a storyteller documenting what was going on? Or did you feel like, you'd rather live to document things for another day instead of fighting with one group or another?
As a journalist, I don't pick up weapons. Obviously, the tools that we use are considered as weapons anyway, and in some cases are more powerful than a single bullet or a 5-ton bomb. So no, I've never ever considered picking up a weapon to kill another human being. Even if my life depended on it, I'd still rely on my tongue to try to talk myself out of it. But I have been motivated to participate in humanitarian efforts, such as, driving a truck filled with refugees that need to cross a front line in Rwanda or something like that, but not in, 96 in Chechnya. No, I was there. I was with the rebels, but I was living in a private dwelling, and the rebels just took over the capital, Grozny. So then, I would follow them around, but, never once did they even encourage me to pick up a weapon. They didn't even need my help. But even if they did, there are rules and regulations, at least I had thought, that prevented journalists morally or ethically from picking up a weapon in a foreign country. Now if I'm in my own country and I have the right to carry a weapon, that's my right as a citizen within the country that I reside in. But if I'm in a foreign country, I have no rights to carry a gun. Just because there's chaos doesn't give me a right to carry a weapon. But if there's an earthquake in my city in Memphis, I might carry a weapon, but I live here. I'm picking up the pieces too. I'm not coming here as an observer. I'm trying to secure my family. All the hotels are booked. So I guess it's different. But as a journalist going into foreign areas, no way. Not even. I'm against it. I don't think. I think that the industry now has designed it to where journalists can be morally against it, but we still pay to have armed guards accompany us wherever we go. So it's an interesting question. I never had to address that question when I was starting out. 10 years ago, it just started being addressed with, say, the Iraq War. And now, we can still have that moral stance on, weapons are bad, they kill people, but I'm in Afghanistan and I've got, 5 armed guards that guard my compound and 2 armed guards that accompany me wherever I go within Kabul. Is it what's right and what's wrong? If I'm paying somebody to carry weapons and protect me, or if I just spend the money and buy my own weapons and say I'm going to protect myself. I don't know where to draw the line. Because especially if you're freelance, it's obviously you don't have the money to pay for the armed guards. But you have every right as a journalist to be on that story. And so your cheapest option is to arm yourself. But, is that the right option? I don't think so. I think both options are bad, to be quite honest. And that's where we are.
Well said. Now,
I don't carry a weapon, and I never have.
Mentioned that you have a family. I've got to ask you, having a child, having a wife, does that affect how you act when you're working than how you acted when you didn't have a family? And also, do you hope that your son in the future follows in your footsteps, or would you rather he do something else?
I'm as a family, as a father, as a husband, as a father, I can't, as a freelancer, before I could wait for 90 days and live on somebody's couch. But now I have to be able to justify my overhead production costs to my family. And if they're not seeing a return now, I don't have to show them a return every month, but within the 5th month, there better be a significant turnaround, or I have to go home, because one, I'm not I'm not an heir to some multi-trillionaire, so I don't have that kind of resources to just wait out a story and then expect that bills are going to get paid back home. So yeah, it does have an effect on your ability to cover the story as close to the story as you can. And then, then there's reality. I'm on these stories in these areas, and usually if I'm there, it's because, there's less coverage, not many people care about the story, and so I find it important. But is it worth being kidnapped or killed for? Of course not, but then there's the other, the reality of, that people need me. They need me around. They want me around. They want me to be a part of their life. My son would like me to be around for a long time. I would like to be around for him for a long time, be around for my wife for a long time. So you have to make those decisions based upon your relationships and commitments towards family. And as for my son, currently he wants to be a nanoscientist. And so I don't think, even if he wanted to do what I do, it's not like, the beginnings of the 19th century where I could have been a photographer from 1920 to 1960, and then he could come in at 1970 and work as if the beats didn't change. So I'm gone from analog to digital to now my camera does video. So, so I've gone from recording still images on celluloid to recording still images in pixels to now framing the same way I've been framing for the last 20 years, but my camera enables me to frame pixels, record pixels, but also gather sound. So it's a real, so now I have 3 more ways to generate an income, but to think that obviously people are going to, get pretty pretty and pretty smart, and universities are going to start teaching their graduates how to, utilize 100% of the 21st century DSLR. And so those days are numbered. And then once that comes, there'll be something new. So by the time my son enters into the workforce, my job isn't going to exist. I mean, it will in some media. If he wants to go into the media, that would be great. But I think by the time he gets, in 10 years, you'll have drones. It'll all be done by drones. And then you'll have some celebrities, just for the award ceremonies. But other than that, majority of it's going to be done totally different than the way it's being done today.
The future will probably be like something out of the Terminator. Now, I've probably got about 3 more questions here, and then I'll let you go. Getting back to Syria, what is, you think, the biggest misconception people have about the conflict?
Well, I think the biggest misconception that people have about this conflict is that, good question. I think a lot of people, if they can find it on the map, that's good. I don't think they realize their misconception is that it's just some insignificant patch within the Middle East. But it is kind of on the doorsteps of Europe, if you would consider Turkey to be moderately European. And Turkey almost joined the EU. So in 2001, I'd say from like 90s, from the 80s, of course, but, from the 80s to 2001, the Taliban were like located, or Al-Qaeda was located, in some remote, obscure area near the Afghan and Pakistani border. And that was like pretty weird and seemed really, really super far away. And now you have Al-Qaeda amassing and taking over border points in Syria that are crossing points with Turkey. So I think it's a big problem. So I think a lot of the Europeans feel that it should be America's issue to deal with. And obviously, America tried to deal with it, but the coalition in Europe fell apart. So I think the big misconception is that Syria is not going to really affect anybody. And I think that's very dangerous.
Now, you mentioned the presence of Islamists in Syria.
Yeah.
I've got to ask you, have you ever encountered any of them a lot while you're working? And if so, have they treated you well, or has there been hostility due to you being an American?
It depends. Now, Syrian jihadists, they were pretty damn moderate. I never met any. I met a few foreign fighters. Not many. I met some IED maker from Baghdad who was laying down IEDs. He wouldn't let me take his picture. I think I told him I was from Canada.
Well,
well done on that one. And then, but so no, I didn't meet any foreign jihadis. I mean, I met a few. I did meet a few, but they didn't. It was very early on. So no, I haven't met al-Nusra, and I haven't met ISIS. At least, I met them, but they weren't. It was more of an official function. There was a video we did but they were really running the Sharia courts of Aleppo. But obviously, the way they were dressed, they would be more aligned with al-Nusra. But at that time, it was early May, so there was still some kidnappings going on, but obviously they weren't worried about me at the moment. So I haven't really had to deal with them there. They're definitely there, maybe 30,000 of them by now. I would see them, but we wouldn't. I saw them all the time. But they wouldn't ID themselves as that. They were difficult. You couldn't smoke in their little sectors. You couldn't do shit in their sectors. And quite frankly, it was boring, and I would leave because I couldn't work. Not because I couldn't smoke, but just because of the limitations and the restrictions they would put on my work. And I'm not going to get sniped at and shot at and dodge mortar fire if I can't do my job. Because I'm not coming there for sport. I'm coming there for work.
Wow. Now, in closing, sir, last thing I got to ask you is, what are your future goals for your career?
20 years from now, survive. I would. I'm really ideally, I have. It's not much goal oriented through the industry. I'm hoping one goal is to finish this book on Syria. The second goal is to, which I'm already doing, is incorporate multimedia, moving imagery into my storytelling. Some short-term goals for work, running some bureaus or whatever. And then, but technology's a weird. So my biggest goal is to be open to seize opportunities that present themselves in the near future. But that really depends on compression rates. I can dream big, but if the technology isn't there to facilitate the dreams, they're going to just remain dreams. So I don't want to, set goals for where I think the industry's going if the algorithms and the compression rates aren't there. And I would like to, in the end, I would like to be known for my paintings.
Wow.
So I would like to, really get back into more of my, the studies I've neglected since graduating from art university. Painting, sculpture, stuff like that.
Wow. Now, Robert, I want to thank you for speaking with me. It was an absolute delight.
Thanks, man. Thank you, Evan. Yeah, have a good one.
The Evan Pretzer Show will be back next week. Be sure to follow Evan on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.